First off, you look great. Props. It's the first weekend of August. You could be anywhere, but you're here. Well done. Well done. Good job. You did that. You look great. Yes, clap for yourself. Well done. You got out of bed. So I hope your summer has been good. We bought a lizard at the Bluhm house. Yes, we did. My 8-year-old gave me a presentation with many pamphlets that he picked up at the local Petco. So I finally caved and got him a lizard since he doesn't play sports. And I'm like, this is your thing. This is your thing. Let this be your whole personality. Also, this summer, you guys, I'm just going to give it to you straight. I started buying my clothes at Costco. It happened. Now, here's the thing. That's my whole personality now. It's like one day you're like, I'm so fabulous. And the next day you're like, this is a great deal. Not only did you buy your clothes, I bought a swimsuit that's made out of trampoline material, and I am thrilled. What happens? How does it happen that one day you know every song on the radio, and then you turn on the radio, you're like, I don't know who these people are. I don't know what they're singing about, and I buy ground beef at Costco. First of all, that's disgusting. That's so gross. Who needs that much ground beef? Like, why? Why? The lighting in there? Yet here I am, thrilled with my purchases. That concludes my summer. No, I'm joking. I have a job. I do other things besides shop at Costco and buy lizards, I promise you. And I'm sure you do too. I'm sure you've had a good summer, and you're showing up, and we're here together, and we have a lot to celebrate this morning. I am going to bring the final message in our Tear and Flame series, which I have been so blessed by, Paul's letter to Timothy. We are taking this glorious ancient letter from a mentor to a mentee, and we're going to stretch it, squeeze it, mold it to get all that we can glean from it. And there really is so much. And in this final passage that we're going to cover, it's kind of this final hurrah of instructions that Paul is giving Timothy. And it's this kind of big crescendo of like, we want everyone to know how good Jesus is. This is the whole kit and caboodle. We want everyone to know that Jesus is gentle and kind and for all of us. Like that's the big message of it. That's everything. And it got me thinking of this idea that we want everybody to hear. So all may hear is the title they told me I had to preach on. And when I was thinking about this, like, well, who lived their life so beautifully to me that I couldn't deny how good God was? Who was the first person in my life that wasn't weird? They definitely weren't a jerk, and they were so kind that the fruit of the Spirit could nourish me. And I was in 7th grade, and it was this couple in their young 20s, and they just showed up for this ragamuffin group of kids from broken homes. They came to our sporting events, which let me tell you what, you want to go see C-string at a 2B school in the middle of nowhere? That is love. Okay? You don't just do that with your time. That is 90 minutes you will not get back. They would be so faithful to show up for our birthdays and take us out to coffee and ask us how we were doing. They loved us so well. They were so convinced that we were lovable that we started to believe it. And it was so ordinary. It wasn't this like, you're amazing, everything's amazing. No, they didn't gas us up. They were like, you are loved as you are. And we're going to show it to you. We're going to show you what love looks like. More verb, less noun. And I recently reconnected with this couple. I ran into them on a flight. I was for work. I was going to Minneapolis, and I'm sitting there, and I just like point as they're walking by. You know, we're still masking on flights, which please do. That's gross up there, man. I don't want to breathe your air. Nasty. They were walking to me. They had their masks on, but I recognize them because they look great. And as they're walking, and I was like, oh my gosh. And we were going to the same place. We were going to the same conference. And so we ended up getting to spend the whole weekend together, just catching up. And hadn't seen them since my wedding, so about 15 years. And it was so amazing. And since then, they have continued to pursue us and show up again. They got kids in college, and love us well again. And in a completely different season, I'm not a pimply middle schooler. Actually, I had great skin in middle school. I just want to say, you guys flawless. It was great. I now have a pimple in the middle of my forehead, so it's coming back to get me now, but great back then. And they are taking our kids camping for a couple days, which we don't have people in our life to pawn our kids off on. So that is a great ordinary blessing that we are so thankful for. And once again, just showing up and feeding us, showing up and loving our kids. And they were in the ministry when I met them, and now they're not. She's a therapist, and he works for the Department of Defense. So definitely swing from the ministry to a completely different line of work, missiles. But it is so beautiful to be loved well. It is so beautiful when somebody models the kindness of Jesus that it radically transforms your whole life. Now I was in 7th grade when I met them, as I said, and I have a 7th grader now. And the legacy of goodness and faith and gentleness and just genuine love that they've left in my life is not lost on me. And as I see it in my kids, it's so, so, so beautiful. So as we talk this morning, I want you to think about who first loved you well, who first was so convinced that everyone needed to know the goodness of Jesus that it even caught you, because that's the invitation that Paul is giving Timothy here, this community and kindness all rolled into one. So I'm going to read from 2 Timothy chapter 4, 9 through 22. And I just want to give a little disclaimer, ladies and gentlemen, that before I do, these mothers picked beautiful names for their children. Okay? Gorgeous names. I will pronounce them in a way that makes sense to myself and what I have Googled. Okay? Don't worry, it was a site of commentaries. But nevertheless, she persisted. Here we go, 2 Timothy 4, 9 through 22. Paul writes, "Do your best to come to me quickly." Here he is in prison in chains, writing. "For Demas, because he loved, has deserted me. Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you. He's helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Titius to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus and Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments." Notice the practical and the sentimental. He's like, I need a coat. And bring the scrolls. Bring those writings. These are precious to me. So good. Verse 14, "Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. You too should be on your guard against him because he strongly opposed our message. At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them." Verse 17, here's our linchpin. "But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength so that through me this message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen." Greet Priscilla and Aquila. Since I have the microphone, please note that is a woman's name first. And the household of And the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, and I left Trophimus sick in Miletus. Do your best to get here before winter. Eubulus greets you, and so does Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers and sisters. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you all. So there's so much instruction. Hey, go check on them. Bring me my coat. Bring me my scrolls. Be wary of these people. Set up some boundaries. There's so much instruction here. There's so much juicy, juicy goodness. But the first thing I want to point out in the whole first part of this passage is this double edge of community that we find. Some people are going to stay. Some people are going to go. Some people are going to go the distance. It's okay. It's okay. Don't hold it against them. This isn't always going to look how it is going to look in a year from now or 2 years from now or 10 years from now. People change, people evolve, people move, people do their thing. There's dissension. You could tell who he was getting along with and who he wasn't. I'm sure he was a very nice guy and never spoke curtly ever, right? No, I'm sure he upset people too, right? So this idea that, hey, this isn't always going to look good. This might get a little hairy at times. Now, I think for those of us who maybe struggle with some hypervigilance in faith spaces after church trauma, this speaks to us. Being like, this isn't always going to go well. This could go sideways on occasion. But don't let it build resentment. Don't let it define you. Understand that this is part of life. I think for some of us, when we have had harm in a faith space, it's very hard for us to see past somebody's own anecdotal choices and our understanding of the divine. But we must be able to step back and look at our resentment for what it is, for what's happened to us, or the choices we've made, and then having to live with those choices. No one wants to live out a story that they didn't want to write. But when we find ourselves in those places, when we find ourselves in community, we understand this isn't going to be perfect, and I'm not perfect either. Within it, there is an invitation for self-assessment. To check ourselves emotionally, relationally, spiritually. Do we want to be somebody that we want to hang out with, that we want to be with in community? Are we giving off vibes that we don't want to be giving off? Is our fruit of the Spirit nourishing to another, or is it bitter to the taste? Henry Nouwen, the great theological thinker, says this: however, community is first of all a quality of the heart. It grows from the spiritual knowledge that we are alive not for ourselves, but for one another. Community is the fruit of our capacity to make the interests of others more important than our own. The question, therefore, is not how can we make community, but how can we develop and nurture giving hearts? Because again, it's going to be hard either way. So how can we have a posture that honors another and doesn't demonize another? Because when there's that ebb and flow of community, when there's that double edge of community, if you will, you have to work pretty hard to not be bitter. You have to work pretty hard to not be bitter. It's so easy. It's such low-hanging fruit. Such low-hanging fruit. But when we bite it, we become part of the problem, not the answer. I think also there's this beautiful invitation in here to just have some ordinary faithfulness, just ministry in the mundane. Hey, Timothy, go check on this couple. Hey, Timothy, go check in with them. Hey, set up some boundaries here. There's all these just normal, everyday Tuesday afternoon, not that glamorous, not anything you're going to write home about, faithfulness. Now, we live in an age of, and always have, of what's in it for me? We are biologically wired to take care of ourselves. We want to take care of number one, and then if there's margin, we'll take care of other people. I think also, The Atlantic came out with an article the other day talking about how not only has church attendance declined by 40% since the pandemic, we now view church not as a ritual or a rhythm of our week, but as something to check off on a to-do list. We view it differently because our financial obligations have never been more demanding across the board in every sector of society. Our commitments have never been more demanding. More is asked of us than, again, ever before. It's a lot. So the idea of fitting in this idea of ministry or caring for one another, that's how we'll define that for our time this morning. Feels like I am just barely keeping my head above water, let alone taking care of others, let alone seeking out the needs of others and being aware and showing up with a casserole on a Wednesday night or whatever, fill in the blank. We got a backpack outreach coming up or bringing a bag of crayons, 24 count. Like, this feels like a lot. Right? It feels like a lot. And when we live in this, what's in it for us, if it's not something we think we're going to benefit from, it's really hard for us to make that stretch. It can be really hard. But I'm convinced it's the fountain of youth. I'm convinced it's what's going to ground us in true belonging. When we care for someone else who can't care for us back, that's the measure of a man or woman, right? When you can love knowing that my gift in all of this is Christ's death and resurrection. My gift in all of this is becoming more like Christ. Because of course you want to feel good when you do something nice. But if even that is your driving motivation, that's a problem. That is a problem. And we're more obsessed with changing the world than ever, that we can be a little bit skewed on what it looks like to just have this mundane, everyday way of caring for something. And that was never what was glorified in the scriptures. What was held as an example was just fruitfulness. Fruitfulness, not success. 100 years ago, there was approximately this many books written on how to change the world. In the 80s, several thousand. Today, there's about 1 million books on the market today of how you can change the world. Now, if you're a woman, they're in the self-help section. If you're a man, they're in the business section, right? But nonetheless, we're obsessed with the idea of changing the world because we want to be somebody great. But what the invitation here that Paul is telling to Timothy, and Paul's been doing ministry for about 30 years at this point. He's like, man, if you could just stay faithful like on a Wednesday night or like a Friday morning and just love people and not be an absolute jerk, that would be a great place to start. Like, it doesn't have to be all fancy. It's just genuinely showing up, even if it's costly. Even if it's costly. One of my favorite examples of this in modern history, and one I just can't get over, is Ruth Beckford Smith. In January 1969, she was asked by her pastor at St. Augustine Church in Oakland, California, if she would start coming in early and use up the church kitchen and make breakfast for community children who were super hungry on their way to school. And these kids were going out without breakfast, sometimes without lunch. And she said yes. She wasn't on the payroll. She didn't get a stipend. She did this for the love of the game. She did this because she genuinely loved people. And she understood what ordinary faithfulness looked like. So she got other church mothers and other neighborhood mothers to join her. They started knocking on doors, pre-internet people, pre-internet. There was no Facebook posts, no GoFundMe. Going to local grocers and the Elks Club and organizations, procuring food and donations. And you know what it's like when a mom's asking you for a donation, you're like, you're not gonna turn me down, are you, right? Like, you're gonna give this. I'm trying to feed some babies. You're gonna tell me you're not gonna feed the babies for breakfast, you know? So needless to say, they were effective, right? They procure all this food and off they go. By the end of the year, they served 20,000 students, them and chapters all over the nation. And they were part of the Black Panthers. And it was their passion, and they were devout women of faith. And they were so passionate about making this happen. At the end of that year, the governor of California said, you have fed more children than the whole state of California has. And the beginning of that next year, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI, said this is the greatest threat to American democracy. These church mothers feeding breakfast for their children. That is the greatest threat to American democracy, is mothers who are faithfully showing up in their community. Ordinary, mundane way. Getting up at 6 a.m. to cook grits and oats and a hot meal. They weren't phoning it in. It was a nice breakfast. And the school districts were like, we can't thank you enough. You're changing the trajectory of our days. We can teach. It's been amazing. And the FBI was like, not on our watch. So with the power of the United States government, they started calling all these grocers and saying that don't donate, they're doing horrible things, called the schools and said these women are poisoning your children. And so within a couple years, it was almost completely died out. They took to raids of the churches while kids were eating in the morning. And I mean, just crazy, crazy stuff. We're talking about 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds who just need to go to math and science. And the longest lasting site, thank you for your patience, the longest lasting site lasted in Seattle until 1977. So many, many years after. So once most of the sites got shut down, they said, fine, if we're gonna do it, you do it. You do it. You won't let us be faithful in this way, well then you do it. And they petitioned before Congress, and it's the reason we have free breakfast today nationwide. Today, 11.8 million children eat for free when they wouldn't have otherwise. I was a senior in high school before I realized I qualified for free breakfast. And I remember when they called me into the office and they're like, hey, just so you know, and I'm like, really, all this time? I haven't had breakfast for like 12 years, and you're just telling me now? Thanks, Mom, for finally filling out the paperwork. And I remember getting a bagel and a little mini carafe of orange juice and just like hiding back tears because I was just so freaking grateful to have something to eat. And to know that it was women in 1969 who were faithful because their church is like, hey, we don't have the resources for this, but mamas, can you show up? And they were like, what's up? Let's do this, you know? And they changed the entire landscape of our nation. Ordinary faithfulness. Now, they went on and did change the whole world, at least our nation, which we think they're the greatest in the world, so whatever, it's fine. Why we call it the World Series, I don't know, guys. But the idea that our ordinary faithfulness can change lives, not only days, months, years, but generations later. Paul knew that when he wrote to Timothy. He knew that this matters. You're it. I'm going to die soon. This is it for me. But you have life ahead of you. You're only getting started, and the generations to come. And we've all said, if you've said yes to Jesus, we're walking in that lineage. How beautiful. How beautiful. How beautiful. So, but then, there also is there's a little bit of warning here too that Paul gives Timothy, and I love it because it's an invitation for boundaries. There's this posture toward enemies that he addresses. He talks about Alexander the metal worker. I love he's like, the metal worker, like the idea, like, you have to feel like there's some sort of burn that he was trying to sneak in there. Like, no, No, he wasn't. But scholars suggest that Alexander perhaps was an informer to the government of these radical Christians, these Christians who would gather from different geopolitical and socioeconomic standings and different caste systems and men and women in the same room talking to each other. How wild. How wild. So it's suggested that that's perhaps why Paul felt so betrayed. And he's saying, don't hold it against him, but don't let him in. What wisdom. And I think in our binary, if somebody's good or somebody's bad, no, there's nuance here. This is somebody that, yes, bless them as they go, but and forgive them. But reconciliation, forgiveness, it doesn't invite you to put yourself back in a place of harm. Come on, it doesn't invite yourself to put where you could be hurt again. That's not healthy. And Paul's saying, don't do that. Don't put yourself in a place where you're going to get hurt. Be wise enough to know where to be and who to be. Now, obviously, in our closest relationships, we want reciprocity and mutuality, 100%, non-negotiable. But there's going to be people in spaces where, yes, you know them, you coexist, but it doesn't mean you entertain all the love in the world. And I think depending on your faith tradition, perhaps you were taught to be nice at the expense of being kind. That we think, no, we just got to love everybody, do everything, and allow everything. There's a lack of generous authority, a lack of generous power that we practice when we aren't willing to have boundaries that protect the many and understand the place of the few that don't have access. We would do that in our own families. We're going to not let harmful people in our home. And it's not saying that we're not letting them into the family of God. It's saying be on your guard. Don't be foolish enough to entertain, let alone give somebody a position of power in your life or a power in the ministry. And I love that he also reinstates Mark as a partner. He's like, he's good. Bring him back. We're fine now. Like, we want to work together. He's helpful to me. He's useful to me. So he reinstates him. And it's just this reminder that our enemy doesn't have a face and a heartbeat and a P.O. box. Our enemy is not against flesh and blood. There is other principalities at play. And you're like, oh, this church, they're going to talk about that. We're going to go there. Just for a minute. Stay with me. But when we demonize another and we drain the humanity from their existence, that's a problem. That's a problem. I think, arguably, this is what separates Christianity from cults. Cults say, if you don't get on board in X, Y, and Z, we will disbar you. You are out. You are dead to us. But in the faith, there's an invitation for nuance and wisdom in your context. And it says, mass forgiveness. Bless you, sister, bless you, brother. But I also want to be wise and operate in responsibility and care for how we're moving this message forward because it matters. N.T. Wright, amazing New Testament scholar, he shares this, and the band can come up at their earliest convenience. He says this, I don't want to be like, get up here. I just need you guys to know my husband said don't make jokes toward the end, and so he would not be appreciative if he was here right now. He's like, no, only the first third. New Testament scholar N.T. writes, he shares this. We need Christian people to work as healers, as healing judges and prison staff, as healing teachers and administrators, as healing shopkeepers and bankers, as healing musicians and artists, as healing writers and scientists, as healing diplomats and politicians. We need people who will hold on to Christ firmly with one hand and reach out the other with wit and skill and cheerfulness, with compassion and sorrow and tenderness to the places where our world is in pain. We need people who will use all their God-given skills to analyze where things have gone wrong, to come to the place of pain and to hold over the wound, the only medicine which will really heal, which is the love of Christ made incarnate once more. Your smile and mine, your tears and mine, your patient analysis and mine, your frustration and mine, your joy and mine. Paul's instruction to Timothy is one that we can all heed. It's one that we can all glean from and find ourselves in the story. There's no one else coming. It's us. We're the plan. C team, B team, A team, whatever you consider yourself, we're it. When we think of the hardest parts of life or the hardest parts going on in someone else's season, and we're like, oh, and he's like, get in there. Like, you're up, girl. You're up, guy. It's you. It's so easy to be preoccupied with our own thing that we can't see beyond ourselves. The fog of our own creation. And we miss the greater invitation. We miss what life is truly about. Loving deeply, loving well, so all may hear. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for who you are. Thank you that you're still the best. You're still our greatest plan A. So as we prepare for communion, and it's an invitation for those who've said yes to Jesus, are invited to partake, or if you're saying yes to Jesus this morning, you're like, I want to start this journey. You're burning the ships behind you. There's no backup plan. Then we invite you to partake in communion with us, to remember his body and blood, his sacrifice, so we could have new life. Him serving as the collateral damage so we wouldn't have to. Oh, Jesus, thank you. Thank you. Be with us now. As we think of those who modeled the love of you so well to us, may we also become that person who can model so well to others. So well. Even in the mundane, even in the ordinary. To you be the glory forever and ever. Amen. I invite you now to partake in communion. And also, if you would like prayer, no matter what you're going through, don't leave without someone praying for you. That is one of the most beautiful parts of the community of Christ, is that we have each other. Life's not easy. We're going to have humble beginnings, and we're likely going to have humble endings, but we don't have to do it alone. Be blessed.